This is George Galloway for كلمة on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London. Coming to you from London. I'm George Galloway, presenting كلمة where every word is free. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London with an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. Donald Trump and Sarah Palin. Not since Caligula and his horse has there been a more ridiculous and fearsome duet. In fact, if you know anything about the English tradition of pantomime, you could describe them as the ultimate pantomime horse, although which horse is the back end of that pantomime horse might be hotly contested. They are bonkers, berserk, uncontrolled, uncontrollable, highly dangerous, and they might soon have their finger on the nuclear trigger. They might soon be in the White House, if not together, then Palin as a visiting aunt. Donald Trump is running away with the Republican Party's presidential nomination, to the consternation of liberals and conservatives alike. He's actually not very conservative, though he is fantastically right-wing. And of course, left-wing people across the whole world are beginning to check out the geography south of New Zealand as being the only safe place to be if Donald Trump is President of the United States. He is the recipient of the anti-politics wave which has swept the entire world, is sweeping the Labour Party in Britain, which led to the election of a leftist, Jeremy Corbyn, as the leader of the Labour Party, and is present everywhere in democratic politics. A plague on all your houses. We don't want any of you. The political class being bankrupt. You wouldn't trust them if they told you which day of the week it was. And Trump has come from nowhere. He was, of course, a successful businessman once, though never remotely as successful as he claimed, and he would have made more money if he'd left the very substantial legacy his father left him in the bank and gone off to play golf, which he much enjoys, buying up golf courses all over Britain, especially in Scotland. And here I must make a confession. Donald Trump is Scottish. That's where the Donald comes from. He was appointed by the Scottish government, the devolved autonomous, near autonomous government in Scotland, as an honorary Scottish ambassador, but they have now withdrawn that. Not the least of the reasons being the truly remarkable rant, and he does rant like no one can rant. And he becomes simply out of control when he does. And he no doubt perhaps regrets the way in which he phrased the comments that he made that caused the British Parliament in the last few weeks to actually have a debate about whether or not to ban him from British shores, because his attack on Muslims, his ranting, foaming at the mouth, Islamophobic tirade sent a chill into the hearts of people hardened by years, if not decades, of Islamophobia here in Britain. He wants to ban all Muslims from American soil, even American servicemen who happen to be Muslims would not be allowed back into the country on any strict or literal interpretation of the comments that he made. Now, if you were afraid already of Donald Trump, how much more afraid were you when onto the field came Sarah Palin, with a pitch to be his running mate, but if not, certainly a pitch to be his visiting aunt. With Palin at his side, he will win a landslide victory. He is, frankly, unstoppable. And the truly remarkable thing, I mean, I've lived a long political life, but I never imagined I'd ever say these words. The truly remarkable thing is that any sensible person is hoping that George Bush's brother can stage a Lazarus-like resurrection from the political grave in which he is now laid. Because Jeb Bush, who raised all the money, who had the support of all the establishment, and who looked to be nailed on before this process started as the Republican Party's nominee, is trailing in 5th, 6th, 7th, or even 8th place. It has been one of the most remarkable damp squibs in political history. It's unlikely that he can revive himself. It's now unlikely that the Republican Party itself will dispense with Donald Trump, telling him that he will be disqualified from being the Republican Party's nominee. Though believe me, they have thought and talked long and hard about that. So, it's Donald Trump then, standing for president. Against whom? Hillary Clinton. It's difficult to say who one should wish in the White House out of those two. It's a pity that one of them has to win. It's a pity that both of them can't lose. But they can't. So get used to it, folks. You've got President Trump, I'm not making that up, or another President Clinton. Now, assembled here in London, we have this audience of distinguished experts that I told you about. And two of them, at least, are American, though rather different in their political stripes. Let's hear first from Ken O'Keefe. Ken, what's your take on Donald Trump? Did I summarize the situation accurately or not?
I think that was a very accurate description in many levels. And what we really can see from all of this is that we've reached a very important step in the evolution of human beings in the modern era, and that is that we've come to realize that overwhelmingly, pretty much all of these politicians, with yourself I will note as an exception, but almost without exception, these people are prostitutes who work for the bankers. And the policies are basically the same policies, left, right, Tory, Labor, Democrat, Republican. Let's look at the actual policies. It's the same never-ending war policy over and over again. All the important matters are taken out of the hands of the electorate and made by these unaccountable people who basically operate with impunity. Why is George Bush and Tony Blair running around free in this world right now? Both of them should be locked up for blatant war crimes, which are a matter of they're self-evident at this point. So people have at least reached the point now where we realize these people are not options. They're all the same. So the choice between, as you say, so the choice, this is democracy in the 21st century, Clinton or Trump, is that actually the best that America can provide to its people? A choice between these two people. Now, the thing that I would say that I find a little bit strange about people's perspective is that I would take an honest jerk anytime over a friendly liar. So while you may not like Donald Trump, and I certainly don't like him, I mean, his views, he's an egomaniac, he's ridiculous. I mean, he should be disqualified on that level alone. If you're so absorbed in yourself, you shouldn't even be qualified for public service. But, you know, if you're going to look at a man like this, he is such an egomaniac that he probably is pretty much telling the truth on what he's saying. You know, this is the way he sees it. At least there's some level of honesty there. I'll hearken back to Malcolm X, who was asked during the elections in the 60s between Barry Goldwater, an open racist, segregationist, and Lyndon Johnson. And, you know, this was supposed to be an obvious question, which one do you prefer? And he said, well, it's the choice between the devil you know and the devil you don't. You know, at least when you're dealing with a devil, if they're honest about it, you know what you're dealing with. Whereas Barack Obama, as an example, put everyone to sleep. Oh, everything's okay. It's all good. Guantanamo's going to be closed. We're going to be out of Iraq, and everything's going to change. No, it didn't. It's the same thing. And we keep going through this process. So at least we've reached the first stage of realizing that pretty much all of these politicians are nothing more than prostitutes. And that's a very important first step.
Well, that's a very powerful as it were, counter or contrary point of view. I'm not unsympathetic to it, except for this reason, that President Trump would have his finger on the button of a thermonuclear arsenal of thousands and thousands of weapons, any one of which could bring about the end of the world. Would you trust him not to trip getting out of bed and fall on the football and accidentally press the button? Or in a rage, a temper, press the button?
You know what, for me it comes down to, this is unacceptable. One of the words that I use consistently in my speaking and whatnot is that this current state of affairs in every way is unacceptable. It's unacceptable that anyone can have their finger on the button of a trigger that can literally launch the end of the world as we know it. Literally. Why do we accept this? No nation on the planet should have nuclear weapons, and any nation that which wishes to endeavor to keep them or produce more of them should be sanctioned. Unlike Iran, which there's no proof, we know of Israel 200 to 400 nuclear weapons. Why is Israel our best friend and ally? Why are we supporting this nation? Why are we supporting other nations that are producing weapons of mass destruction? Why are we selling weapons of mass destruction to Saudi Arabia? Why are we allowing this reality in the first place? So whether it's Trump or whether it's Clinton, it's unacceptable. Period. The whole state of affairs is unacceptable. But I'll agree with you. This is a very dangerous equation. Having someone, I don't believe the president has any real power anyway. The last president who exercised real power and integrity was John F. Kennedy. And we can get into that later, but that's the last one that had any honor and integrity, if you ask me. So I don't think Donald Trump values his integrity more than his life, and that's why he'll follow the orders. He'll do exactly what he's supposed to do. His advisors will give him all the directives he needs. But I agree with you. It's an eminently dangerous situation, and Donald Trump, nobody should have their finger on that button.
Okay, Charlie Wolf, you're also an American, a Republican, not a swivel-eyed, wild Trumpite, but you do know your party well. Am I right when I say that Trump is running away with it?
Oh, yeah, and I think we can blame Barack Obama for this. I can agree to some extent with Ken on a couple points. He is sort of snoozy, puts you to sleep, and he's not in touch with the world. And they see Trump as a man of action. You know, we have a very dangerous world right now, not so much for nuclear weapons, but because we have someone in the White House that really is leading from behind. And I mean, I don't know how Trump would govern, but at least I think we would be more out in front. It's interesting to note, for instance, the one thing that really got a cheer last night with Sarah Palin's endorsement was talking about kicking ISIL's backside, not quite in those terms. Americans don't like to lead from behind. They don't necessarily like to go to war, but they don't want to be walked over, and they don't like to lose.
Well, this is our problem, though, you see. I'm not in second place to you or Sarah Palin in my wish to kick ISIL's backside. The problem is the Yanks are good at trying to kick backsides. They kicked millions of backsides in Indochina until they were defeated. They kicked a lot of backsides in Iraq until they were driven out. How many more backsides and how many more places do you want to kick?
Well, no one wants to go and kick backsides for the sake of kicking backsides, but when security is at stake, then there's a reason to. And, you know, I feel for people like Ken and his fellow brothers in the services that nowadays in war, it's more like you need a law degree. You have to go in there and you got your engagement card is probably bigger than the European treaty, you know, when you can shoot, when you can't shoot up against an implacable enemy. But, you know, let me explain why Trump is working. Again, you have Barack Obama, who is not connected with reality. And I don't want to say necessarily that Mr. Trump is either, but he communicates from the hip. He's in some respects you. And, you know, there's a lot of similarities. You may be on the left, he may be on the right, but you speak your minds. You know, you listen to politicians here in the UK, there's a certain way, and you know how they speak, they can't admit to anything because they're afraid the press will hold them to account. You say boo one day, they'll say, well, you said bah 30 years ago, what's going on? Someone like Trump is refreshing, and Carson to a lesser extent, because he speaks his mind and he's not worried about about PC, and he switches his opinions every 5 minutes, but no one cares. And he gets away with things the other politicians can't do. And on one level, it is refreshing to hear someone, you know, I mean, the jokes are bad, and sometimes he puts his foot in his mouth, and as far as the Muslim comment, yeah, it was badly worded. It was probably offensive, but it wasn't to the extent that the British Parliament should be debating it for 3 hours. That was a massive waste of time over really nothing. No one listened to what he said. He wasn't talking about banning Muslims forever. What he was talking about, there was a threat to the country, and his complaint was with the government. You remember that second clause was, until the government figures out what the heck is going on. And everybody took it, and they jumped all over it, and they caricatured it. I'm not necessarily defending the guy, but again, I think the rest of the world, and especially the British Parliament, was not their finest hour.
Let me ask you, in a way, Ken made reference to this too. Is this really the best that the United States can do? This I find difficult to get my head around. The United States is the most successful country in the history of the world. It has amongst the best educated people in the world. It is the leader and master in so many fields, and yet the quality of the political leadership that periodically emerge is so low. It is extraordinarily low.
I could say the same about here. Ever since really Maggie and Reagan agree or disagree with him, there was leadership. I remember the late Tony Benn saying to me...
I seem to remember you like Tony Blair.
Yeah, well, one thing that Tony Benn said to me many years ago was he said, he admired Thatcher. He didn't agree with her, obviously, but he said at least she meant what she said, and she said what she meant. And we don't get that anymore. I think Cameron doesn't know what it's like to be a conservative. I don't think that Barack Obama has been a shining example. And Hillary Clinton, I mean, some have said, if it's a choice between Clinton and Trump, I think, in some ways outshines her. I'm not really sure of either of them, but I would say this. I would love to see a debate between the two, because Trump will, basically whip the floor with her, because he's not PC. He's not going to bow down to her. There's big problems as far as she's concerned. I mean, we don't know what's on her server. We don't know what sort of security. She's totally out of touch with the world. Benghazi was a complete disaster, and yet she's got that cackling laugh of hers. Someone says, well, let's talk about Benghazi, and she cackles away, and then says, well, 4 people died. She goes, oh, yes, and she changed. She's just totally out of touch. I mean, I'd almost like Bill back. At least Bill had some savoir-faire. Just keep the women out of the White House, and we should be all right.
Akib, what do you say?
Hi, George. I think I agree with the main point that both of your guest speakers have made. That I think if Donald Trump faced Hillary Clinton, he would absolutely destroy her. He'd completely annihilate her in any sort of debate. I mean, he's already said that I paid her to attend my wedding. So he's already exposed her for what she is. She'll do anything for money. She's speaking to banks. She's made, I think $2 million out of just speaking to banks. And then you've got Bernie Sanders on the other side, who doesn't really have a chance of winning, but he's trying to, capitalize on this same sort of anti-politics and anti-Washington agenda. I don't think he's going to be that successful, because the Democrats are seeing Hillary Clinton as probably their best chance to win, and in my book, she's just not going to be able to do it. She's got a terrible past. She's got a terrible track record, and she will get exposed at every turn if she does win the nomination for the Democrats. So I think Trump, if he wins the Republican nomination, I think Trump will become the president. Easily.
I can hardly believe we're saying this. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Yes.
I'm Ali, an Iraqi filmmaker. One thing I wanted to ask is, do you think this is kind of like a misdirection by the Rupert Murdoch and co kind of organizations, in a sense that they have Donald Trump and all his talking, and the media is just going forensic about it and just kind of broadcasting everything he says in bad light, and just kind of more fear-mongering in an attempt to try and get everybody else to say, let's vote Hillary?
No, first of all, I don't think that anyone, even as powerful as Rupert Murdoch, is in control of the minds and the hearts and the actions of scores of millions of people, because that's what we're talking about here. Nobody can make a decision in some secret conclave and lead the whole of the American people down a particular path. No, I think paradoxically, from left and right, our 2 American guests have got it right, and I think I was right in what I said at the beginning. This is anti-politics. It is a plague on both your houses. It is a judgment that the political class is not fit for purpose. and Trump, larger than life, ranting and raving, foaming at the mouth, has caught the zeitgeist on the American right. And I agreed with Charlie that if he gets into a debate with Hillary Clinton as the two main contenders, whilst it will undoubtedly horrify the whole world, I mean, just, Charlie, you'll never be off the television talking about it, he will absolutely monster her. And actually, from the Republicans' point of view, there's probably no one, I don't know if he can beat her, but there's probably no one else with a better chance of beating her. Quick response, Charles.
I would say probably Rubio has a good chance, and possibly Christie. And remember, no votes have been taken yet on either side. But I think what's also important is it's not, like even going back to this Muslim comment, if I can refer to it as such, it's not so much what Trump said. No one's noticed why are people gaining, why is the comment gaining traction? And again, it goes back to what you were saying. The government is not serving them. They're mad at the political class. They're mad at the establishment. They're even mad at the outsiders. You know, even Ted Cruz isn't doing so good. It is really Howard Beale, remember from Network, by Patty Chayefsky, this is really the doors, and the windows and the shutters are opening and people are outside yelling, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
That's a good point to take a break. We'll be right back.
Do you know who Donald Trump is, and do you think he'll be a good president of the USA?
I do know who he is, and I don't think he'd be a good president of the USA, no.
I am well aware of Donald Trump, and I do not think he would be a good president for the USA.
I've heard some of his, suggestions and policies, and they do seem a bit extreme, but at the end of the day, something extreme is needed nowadays.
Well, first of all, I have to say I absolutely despise the air that he breathes, and I think that he would ruin all of our international relations that we have with the world.
Like the UK should take a stance and ban Trump?
I think he's a bigot. However, I agree with the principle of free speech, so people can say what they like, and I don't agree with the proposal that he should be banned from entering the UK.
See, this is where it gets tricky because, banning someone because they want to ban people, there's a certain irony to that. So I'd much prefer the idea that we let Donald Trump in and then we just ignore him.
I think we should take a stance, but I'm not sure that banning is the correct procedure.
I think Trump kind of thrives off of this negative attention. I think the best thing we can do is just ignore him. So I don't think imposing bans or doing anything is going to make any difference. He loves that. I mean, the more negative he is, the more the media portrays him, the more he thrives, unfortunately.
Well, of course, those Americans in London were unusual because they've got passports and most Americans do not. They've traveled here to see Europe, which probably means they're a bit more worldly than those who are providing the base for Donald Trump. But it's a big base, I believe, an unbeatable one. Let's see what the audience thinks. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm Carl El-Khawairi, and just to reply on the gentleman commenting on Mr. Sanders' momentum in this pre-election phase. Now, I think for someone who's facing two huge people like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I think Sanders is probably gaining momentums, at least at the grassroots level, for people that you just mentioned who are really shouting to the establishment that they are sick of it. Those people don't want Wall Street to be ruling the world and all that. Now, again, that's just a small note that Sanders, whether I support him or not, is gaining a huge momentum given his opponents, and he has a chance there. Now, as to Mr. Trump's policy or comment on Islam, I think Muslims who are usually, especially the very sensitive ones and maybe overreactive ones, the ones we see protesting against caricatures like Charlie Hebdo or any other form of criticizing or ridiculing of their religion, are not as offended. Probably the caricature offended them more than someone who wants to ban them. Because Trump, in his statement, did not insult. He came from a background of national security, whether he is right or wrong. He deems those people, given that a state is established under the name of their religion, a so-called state, obviously with very porous boundaries and undefined boundaries, the Islamic State holds the name of this religion. So as ignorant as he may be or his supporters may be, he has a valid reason to conceive this perhaps wrong idea, and banning him is a bit, it's like banning an idea, and you cannot control the mind, whatever ideas it may conceive.
I didn't support banning him, and the British Parliament yesterday was fulminating about him, but it had no power to ban him either. Actually, a ban on Trump coming to Britain would be right in his sleeve, I think. He would have welcomed the enormous publicity that would have occurred as a result, because he's running as the outsider. He's running as the man that the establishment loves to hate. I know that position. I've been in it for quite a long time, and I'm running for Mayor of London on a similar platform, though very different politics. I don't see how you can seriously say that Trump didn't insult Islam by saying that all 2 billion Muslims in the world should be excluded from their country because ipso facto they were potential terrorists. This is utterly ridiculous. The Ku Klux Klan that lynches black men in the southern woods are all Christians. Trust me, they're never done telling us how Christian they are. The idea that Christians should be held responsible for the actions of men in white hoods lynching black men would be too ridiculous for words. Yet that's exactly the equation that Trump made about Muslims. Am I right?
Well, not totally. Remember, the Islamic State are calling for a worldwide caliphate, and there has been talk about saying we plant people within the refugees. Again, it was inartfully stated. I think if he had said, because of the security concerns, I feel that people from Syria and maybe nations X, Y, and Z should not be allowed in the country yet until we know who we're letting in and why we're letting them in, because we are the great melting pot. We have a long history of it. And let's not also forget, and it was a great stain on our history, it was the most liberal president of the modern era, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who not only didn't allow Japanese in, he took Japanese American citizens, totally different, and interned them in camps. Now, I don't support it, but at the same time, there's an old expression that goes, their present, or our history was their present. So, 2020 hindsight is a wonderful thing. And again, he wasn't instituting a policy. He's not the government, but he was throwing something in to be debated and argued. And again, it isn't going to happen because most people aren't in favor of it.
Yes, gentleman right at the back.
Thanks, George. My name's Ben Riddle, and I'm just an ordinary member of the public. Can I just answer to the American...
Charles.
Sorry, Charles. Hi. But what you said there, Donald Trump didn't make that, didn't distinguish between Muslims and those from Syria. And it was offensive. I mean, I took offence, really. But you can't make those mistakes. And I just wonder what's going on up here in his mind if he couldn't, as a man who isn't stupid, couldn't make that connection. And that's a big problem for me. I mean,
Well, I think he was in a rage. and this is my main problem with him because it goes back to the finger on the trigger. I think he's a pretty out of control guy, and I know what was going through his mind. I know the statement that he made could have been defended by someone else on the right who had artfully crafted this viewpoint and artfully stated it. But that he didn't artfully fashion this statement and he didn't artfully articulate it was because he was in a temper, he was in a rage, he was ranting and raving. And that's pretty dangerous in the President of the United States, no?
Who was it said he's unhinged? Somebody from his own side. And I think that's pretty much
I think it was Jeb Bush who said he was unhinged. I think that's a pretty good description. Jeb Bush's problem is he's languishing at around 7 or 8% in the polls. Let me hear from Charlie, if I may, on that.
Well,
Charlie,
he wouldn't be the first. Sorry to interrupt. He wouldn't be the first to be unhinged. You know, remember Nixon had all sorts of comments. You know, when you're at the top of the organization, you yell and swear a lot at your staff. And yes, he is a business leader. He's probably the hotel's version of a Bob Maxwell. You know, he's used to getting it done. And this is where I do think President Trump would have problems. He is used to being on The Apprentice. You know, in other words, saying, Ken
fired.
or whomever, this is what I want the wall, I want it tomorrow, but we can't, you're fired. You know, and it doesn't work that way when you're dealing with Congress, who are essentially the board of directors, if you will. You know, they hold power, you hold power. You just can't do the I want it now. That's where I think he won't work as president. But he does have that sort of, again, megalomania, that, you know, that push, that drive, which is it's a two-edged sword. What makes him great as a leader is also what causes him to say words like Muslim or whatever. But I don't think he's quite the caricature that people make him out to be. Like, for instance, on the lines about misogyny, when he made the comments about Carly Fiorina. I mean, that line about, Carly, I think you're beautiful. I mean, I just died when I watched that. That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. But if you ask in the business community, within the Trump organization, he hires women, more women than anybody at the top levels, and gives them the chance to develop a career. I've heard nothing but good comments about him in dealing with women in employment. So I don't think he's quite the raving lunatic bigot that, you know, people like to make him out. It's easy to do that.
That's not the most reassuring comment I've ever heard. I don't think he's quite the raving lunatic.
I don't think I know. Listen, he's a megalomaniac, and he probably swears a lot. I've had bosses that do that. I'm sure you've worked for people like that. But again, I don't see him as a bigot, to be quite honest.
Let me, just before I pass the microphone on, why has Jeb Bush, with his name, with his history, family connections and so on, why has he done so disastrously badly?
I think he's been out of the loop for some time. And even Hillary, if you look back at the start of her career, at the campaign, her book launch was horrible. They're just out of the loop. They just don't know how to get back on the bicycle and get pedaling again. And he just doesn't seem to have the pizzazz.
Pizzazz. Ken, you've got pizzazz. What happened to Jeb Bush's pizzazz?
Well, again, you know, this is the anti-political time that we're in, you know, and the system has been so morally bankrupt for so long that, of course, it would eventually come to this. And thank God for that, quite frankly. I think what's more important, actually, than even... There's a lot of theater going on here, and I have to say there is some credence to the argument that this is a really entertaining show, but what real substance is there? I don't really agree that, as I've said earlier, that the president formulates... Do we really believe that George Bush was sitting there in the Oval Office and formulating policy? Do you really believe that? And do you really believe that... No, he was
colouring in his colouring books.
That may have been it, but I mean, my understanding of it is that you have your advisors, and they give you the directives from those that have the real power, who effectively own our governments. I mean, it couldn't be more transparent than, for instance, Netanyahu's third visit to the U.S. Congress. Only one other man has achieved that goal, and it's pretty interesting who that was. Yeah, Churchill. And ultimately, this theater that we're watching has no real substance. The elections are rigged. First off, George Bush didn't even get the popular vote in 2000. That's not debatable. So what kind of democracy actually affords the winner the opportunity to have less votes than the loser? That's the antithesis of democracy, and yet that's officially on record right now. When we look at the choices, look at the choice. Is that a choice? Seriously, Trump And Clinton, I mean, that's a sham in itself. That's literally. There was a presidential candidate recently that actually had a huge groundswell of popular support, Ron Paul. And many methods were used. I don't care what you think about this man. He had integrity, and he had a lot of support. Everything he said he would do for 30 years in Congress, he did it. Consistent the whole way through. So I admire that. Integrity is a very precious commodity and so rare, it's hardly even visible in the political realm. But the choices are not even legitimate. But let's get into the Electoral College. Why do we have an Electoral College system in the 21st century? Does anybody even understand what it is? The whole system is rigged, from electronic voting machines to the gerrymandering that occurs to be able to change districts to favor a different agenda. The whole thing, the reality of how much money you need, the whole system is completely bankrupt. And there is a movement in America and around the world. I think the necessary step now is very organized, very quantifiable votes of no confidence. We recognize that none of these people have anything but the status quo behind them, and that they will continue to take us down this insane path where we already are in a world war, arguably, and really, but full-scale Third World War is what will happen if we have a Clinton in office or a Trump. Let's look at these policies. They're pure insanity on every level. And whether it's Tony Blair or David Cameron or George Bush or Barack Obama, these policies have been rather consistent the whole way through, and they're insane, literally insane. As a perfect example of that, picking a fight with Russia? Are you serious? We're going to pick a fight with Russia, a nuclear-armed Russia, some of the toughest people on the planet who will not bend over for anybody. Why are we doing that unless there is an active attempt to instigate a Third World War?
Oh my goodness. It gets worse. We'll be right back. Microphone out on the streets of London just to test the reaction of people to Donald Trump. Watch this.
What do you think of his remarks about ethnic minorities, especially his proposed policy of banning all Muslims from entering America?
As I said, it's extreme, but with the terrorist situation that we're facing all over the world, he has some type of a point. I can't say, you can ban anybody from going anywhere, but he has a point, at least bringing up the immigration problem.
I think it's an embarrassment to my country. I think one of the things that makes the United States great is that we do open our doors to people. And I think it's embarrassing. I do not believe in that opinion, and I don't want people to think that all Americans feel that way. And it's appalling.
Despite offending so many people, his popularity ratings are rising. What do you make of that?
There are people that think like him just out of ignorance, and he's activating that constituency.
People have the right to vote for whoever they want. It's their choice, but I'd say maybe look into him a bit more, maybe research him a bit further.
I find that quite terrifying that my fellow Americans actually, like him and support him and put so much energy into that. I think that they're not actually paying attention to real politics. I think that they're paying attention more to their own, I hate to say this, but like bigotry and ignorance.
Well, if he wins the Republican nomination, I hope he doesn't get voted in as president.
On the other hand, even the slightest chance of Trump in the White House is such a horrific prospect for America and the world.
Well, there's no doubt about that, is there, Ken O'Keefe, that most of the world we pretty frightened at the prospect of a President Trump?
Yeah, I really don't think that the president has anything to do with any real decision-making, as I've said. He is, however, a reflection of what the policies are or at least the way they appear to be. Hillary Clinton, I think, is even more dangerous. Let's look at this woman. I mean, she is a career criminal. The family, the Clinton family, and the dead bodies laying in the wake of that family in dirty dealings is so long, it beggars belief that they haven't been destroyed politically long ago. She is a first-grade psychopath, if you ask me. So between her and Trump, I don't really see a huge difference. But, you know, getting back to what I was saying, yes, the situation is dire. It's been dire for a long time. I think I'll refer back to Kennedy again, the last president who had any integrity. I believe that Kennedy was a servant to the rich his whole life. He came from a moneyed family. He knew the system. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. But then the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred, and we came this close to a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. And I believe that transformed him. And what's for sure is that after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was disobeying the orders directly. He was doing things like insisting that Israel's nuclear power plant, ضمنها, be inspected. Imagine if that had happened back in the 60s. Would Israel now have 200 to 400 nuclear weapons? He was insisting on that. He was also insisting that the American Zionist Council, the precursor to today's AIPAC, be registered as a foreign agent, which would have neutralized the power of the Israeli lobby way back in the 60s. Imagine if he'd gotten away with that. But even more powerful than that, he was getting ready to abolish the CIA in its current form, and even more powerful than that, he bypassed the Federal Reserve Bank. The private Federal Reserve Bank was bypassed by Executive Order 11110. He bypassed that bank. He was dead within 6 months. That is the answer today, and it was Ron Paul who was the last one who really started talking about this, ending the Fed and literally having an accountable system that's not this current system, which is pure insanity. And as long as that financial system stays in place, as long as we have private bankers in control of the issuance of money, from the Bank of International Settlements to all the central banks, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, nothing will change. And I don't think Trump or Clinton or any of that really matters as long as that system is in place. It's very interesting theater, but I don't think there's any real substance to it. I think we need to deal with the head of the snake, and that's the financial system. The bankers own our governments, flat out.
Well, I don't disagree with that last point, but anybody who says it wouldn't have made a difference in 2001 if Al Gore or George W. Bush had been in the White House, I just don't agree with that. Or anybody who argues that it wouldn't have made a difference whether Jack Kennedy or Barry Goldwater had been in the White House. If it had been Barry Goldwater, we wouldn't be here. There would have been a nuclear holocaust. Goldwater and Kennedy were not the same thing and would not have made the same decisions. Gore, though I have no respect for him at all, was not George W. Bush. I don't believe that Gore would have invaded and occupied Iraq. I might be wrong on that point, I'll grant you. But I don't believe that he would. So it matters who's in the White House. It's of course true that the president is not a free agent, but I believe that that thesis is in danger of letting, for example, Barack Obama off the hook. Obama, many liberals say, well, what could he have done? He couldn't have done good things. He couldn't have done the right thing because he's not really in control. Well, I just don't accept that. If you are elected with a landslide majority, as Barack Obama was, you could have done the right thing. You didn't want to. Ken?
Just very quickly, because I want to give time for everybody else, but basically what we disagree is I don't believe the policy would have been any different. Barack Obama came in, and as did Tony Blair, on a hail of popular support and a platform that was laid out, and it was all just patent lies, whereas the Republican or the conservative candidates will be slightly more honest in what they're intending to do. I don't believe for a second that the president has any real decision-making process. In fact, I go back to what I said about Kennedy. That is the last president who actually exercised true integrity, and he died as a direct result for that. So I don't see that Clinton or Trump are going to change that equation at all. I don't see the candidates here, other than Corbyn, who, that's another subject, is really going to change that at all. The bottom line is either you believe that presidents and prime ministers make the decisions that they actually matter. If you believe that, fine. I disagree. The bankers own our governments, and I mean that in a literal sense. No decision is made without their approval. Their advisors hand that all over to our presidents and prime ministers, parliamentarians and congressmen and senators. That is my view, and if I had more time, I would articulate why.
Yeah, that's definitely not mine, and it's a policy of defeatism, because it means that there's no point in changing the political leaders.
I cannot accept that. No. I am not defeatist at all. I see a better world, and I know we can have it, but I don't believe we're going to get there by deluding ourselves that the politicians are going to save us. That I don't agree with.
It's an argument for saying it doesn't matter whether A or B is elected, and I just can't accept that.
There's other options.
Charlie.
There's other options.
Charlie.
Well, I mean, it's not just A or B, it's also the Congress. Let's not forget that the Constitution is what rules in the United States, and the chief executive's job is to be just that, the chief executive. He does not make the laws. So, you talk about wanting to do good things. Well, some people think that what Barack Obama wants to do vis-a-vis gun control is a good thing. Maybe it is. I don't have a problem with that. But he doesn't legislate. So that's been my problem in a president that's skirting around the Congress. And it's also interesting to note that the Congress, in the 8 years that Mr. Obama's been in charge, has changed. I mean, he could have done a lot of things in the first, 2 years, I think. He had a Democratic Congress behind him, and the people said, we don't like what's going on. And they've taken over the House, the Senate, the governorships. That's a sign that people aren't happy with Mr. Obama. But again, the president has some powers, obviously. I don't think he can, by the way, just go and hit the nuclear button. That's something where you're going to be conferring with your cabinet. They have to support you in this. The military chiefs have to support you. So it's not quite as easy as bring me the button. I'm going to hit the button. That's a pretty scary option.
It wasn't Dr. Strangelove.
No.
And it's all repeating itself, if you ask me. Let's hear from the gentleman in the middle row.
Hello, my name is Ali. I have one question, George. 500,000 people in the UK voted to ban Trump. So what will happen if he become a president? And would their concern just be ignored, or what happened?
Well, 500,000 people is an enormous number of people to sign a petition. It's the biggest ever petition to Parliament. But there's 65 million people in the country, so you can't say there's anything intrinsically undemocratic in not bowing down to the demand of 500,000 people, however impressive that is. I opposed banning Trump from coming here for a variety of reasons. First of all, if we ban someone like him from coming, it makes it more likely that they in the United States will ban other people from coming, maybe even me. And secondly, because, as someone pointed out, in the Vox Pops, banning someone for wanting to ban people is probably a trifle illogical. Thirdly, because the United States is the most powerful country in the world, he might be the next president. I'm not sure it's the best start to British-American relations to have banned the president from coming before he became the president. I think that the young people on the screen who argued the best thing to do is ignore Trump is already way too late. You cannot ignore this elephant in the party of the elephant that's sitting in the corner. You can ridicule them, though. I mean, I'm in favor of laughing at our political leaders. It's quite effective, actually. I mean, we could have had a debate as to whether that's a wig he's wearing or not. We could have had a debate about what his IQ might be. I don't, by the way, regard them as some successful businessman. Actually, a lot of that is just hot air. You made the comparison with Robert Maxwell. I played some part in his downfall. He was exactly like Trump, announcing 500, 700, 900 million pound investments here, there. I'm going to take this over and I'm going to put in hundreds of millions, and it was all just hot air. He almost never put any money into anything, and all the while he was stealing the money of his own employees in the shape of their pension funds. Let someone who hasn't spoken yet. Anyone? wants to join in. Yes, the lady in the middle row.
I was going to ask, my name's Zoha, by the way, I'm a student. I was going to ask you, if the Americans work for him, then why should we worry? Because, like, if they want him, then...
Well, of course, if they want him, they must have him. But we have a right to worry because the United States has a habit, rather regularly, of coming over here and kicking other people's ass, to use Charlie's immortal phrase. Except it's not usually a kick in the ass. It's usually high explosive, bursting your head open and cutting the head of your wife off as she sits next to you. It's not really a kick in the ass. It's really red hot molten metal and sheets of flying glass decapitating people. So why should we worry? Because he'll have a lot of power to do even more of that. What do you say?
Yeah.
I persuaded you.
Hi, George. My name is Ali Reza. Trump says that he funds his own campaign. Can we trust that there are no corporate interests behind him?
I think you probably can. I think he's got enough money to fund his own campaign. He's probably raising money from the public. But paradoxically, he's the candidate least in hock to the bankers and big business and the rest because he has no real need of them. So if he said that, I personally would be inclined to believe him. Well, look, we'll be right back after this.
The political issues in the States, but I had a comment on what Ken says actually regarding to the fact that it doesn't matter if anyone comes to the presidency, it doesn't matter, their role is the same. Actually, the enforcement comes from some other else. I just wanted to point out that as you said, it would be matter because if you are a man who can be powerful, who can be rich, and who can bully your cabinet, and you could be a persuasive person, so definitely you can persuade your government to press the button. That's it. And
well, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that a president can make a difference. Like Ken, I grew up as a child with a picture of John F. Kennedy on my wall underneath a picture of the Pope. That's what people of my Irish Catholic background did. And I share many of the points of admiration of Kennedy that Ken expressed. But to argue that it didn't matter whether Gerald Ford or Jimmy Carter was the president, or it didn't matter that George Bush or Al Gore was the president, I just can't accept that. I think it's taking it too extreme. No, let's take... do you want to come back?
Yes, he wants to come back. But I had another point to say. In agreement to what you said about the banning him from entering to the UK, I think that's an issue which we shouldn't really discuss it. This debate is waste of time in the Parliament. We should focus on something else. As a British Muslim, I think the Muslims should organize themselves to show to the world, to all the world, to show that they have the positive contribution with their other people, with their other nations. Like, for example, as a TV, if you could do it, as I use your microphone, to say to other people, we should organize themselves to show them our contribution as educated people, as a person who is useful for the society in the UK, in the USA, is much better than focus just for some nonsense comment, say, as people
well, it
say,
wasn't the Muslims who demanded the debate on the banning of Trump. It was 500,000 citizens of all kinds. And the members of Parliament who were calling for that ban were people of all faiths. I happen to think that they were wrong.
Yes, sir. Do you think that if Donald Trump goes into power, do you think that it will kind of shift the power balance, world power balance? Because as the woman in the voice box was saying, that it might have a a very deep impact to the relations they have, the international relations with the countries America has?
Certainly with European allies. I'm pretty sure about that. He has actually expressed a wish for better relation with Russia, paradoxically. He seems to have some kind of rapport with President Putin. So in terms of taking us to the brink of a nuclear war, maybe Ken's right, he wouldn't be quite as dangerous as Hillary Clinton. Yes, sir.
3 points, George. I'd like to comment on the Jeb Bush and how in the world would Jeb Bush not really be in the top 3, at least, on behalf of the GOP. Now, where in the world do you see someone who has mentored you run in the elections against you? And that's what Marco Rubio did, embarrassing his own Hispanic population, American Hispanics, that making them appear by what he did that he's not loyal whatsoever. Now, to the Parliament in here, the Commons, now you mentioned that it wasn't really the Muslims who were most defensive on Donald Trump's remarks. Now, we did see, I forgot the name of the young MP, the woman who Tulip, yes, Miss Tulip, who was really the most aggressive person on that. Now, there's a bit of a situation here now when a progressive, a real progressive, liberal, Western person objects to what Trump is saying, fine.
She is a Western liberal secular
yes, but
politician.
Supposedly
She'd
her
want me to
roots,
point
perhaps as a Muslim, and I say it very blatantly, perhaps when they came to the UK they wanted to be liberal, but now they're complaining about a ban that is supposedly protective for the good Muslims, I believe.
Well, as I say, I'm against the ban for entirely pragmatic reasons. There are people who should be banned. Wilders, the Dutch fascist, for example, I supported banning him because he was coming here deliberately to stir up racial and religious hatred, and crimes would have followed his appearance here. I did say that if Trump came here and did the same, he should be arrested. But you shouldn't presume that he would do that. I'm pretty sure that he would not have.
Let me give a ray of hope as we are, the show is waning here. Let's not forget the Constitution of the United States. The whole raison d'etre of the founders was to limit the powers of government. We went in, having come from the rule of England, not trusting governments, and everything about that is. If you look at the Bill of Rights, it's negative rights. In other words, the government cannot do this. The government cannot do that. It can't infringe on the powers of the press. It can't infringe on the right to bear arms. The people vest the Congress with certain powers. They vest the executive branch with the president with certain powers. So no matter who it is, they are limited. So I don't think Trump is going to have the ability to just willy-nilly cause World War III. Listen, if we could survive Nixon, and I happen to like Nixon personally, then we can survive just about anything. And also, just speaking of Nixon, you were talking about, this sort of Robert Maxwell mentality. People at that level do have it. Nixon actually was a very good president. This is a guy that started the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, but he had a fatal flaw, and it ended up, relations with China, ended up getting him impeached, and he had to quit. So remember, we have a constitution. I know there are problems. I'm sure Ken has thoughts on conspiracy. Some I could understand, some I don't agree with. But ultimately, I think the world will continue on.
Will survive.
It will survive, yes.
Ken. The thing that I would say is, and I believe this is the next logical step with the anti-political movement that's very much on the rise, and rightfully so, is that we don't just have a choice. I'm not going to contend, yes, there will be some differences in policies between a left or a right candidate, but not in any substantial way when it comes to the most important things, such as war. Those that rule the world know that the only way to maintain control is to constantly divide us. So we must always create some sort of boogeyman to fight, and always we have a war, and always we're being lied to. This has been consistent for so long, it's not even seriously debatable. That will continue as long as we accept the choices that are put in front of us. So if these are the two choices, and we say, well, we should pick that one because it'll be better Well, just understand the fact that
less
nothing,
bad?
it's nothing
What
of
about
any
less bad?
substantial. Well, I renounced my U.S. citizenship, although they didn't honor that, but nonetheless. So what I'm saying is that we have to stop accepting these choices. These are not real choices, and we do have options. I mean, it would take more time for me to articulate some of my ideas, but there are a lot of good ideas out there. You don't need to listen to me. I refuse to accept these options because they're not acceptable. It is not acceptable to have a choice between these cardboard cutout prostitutes and nothing else.
Well, look, I know where you're coming from, of course, and I accept some of it. But I'm here to tell you that most members of Tony Blair's cabinet did not want to follow George W. Bush to invade Iraq. Most Labour members of Parliament did not want to follow George Bush in the invasion of Iraq. Most military generals did not. Most bankers, in my opinion, did not. Most civil servants, most ambassadors, most foreign office officials did not want to follow George Bush into the invasion of Iraq. We did so because Tony Blair was the Prime Minister and because of the power that he had. I happen to know that the great majority of British ambassadors in the region were constantly saying to the Foreign Office, this is a very bad idea. But Tony Blair overruled them. He overruled the Foreign Office, he overruled the experts, he overruled the generals, he overruled the lawyers, he forced the lawyers to change their testimony and sign a different piece of paper. So don't tell me that it doesn't matter who's in charge. If not for the fact that Tony Blair was in charge of Britain in 2003, Britain would not have joined the invasion of Iraq. I'm in a position to know that.
So if you were to project the other candidate, what would be the other candidate if it wasn't Tony Blair? Who was running against Tony Blair? You firmly believe that Tony Blair, as a singular man, is responsible for taking this country into that war. You believe that he is solely responsible and that the system that surrounds him has nothing to do.
I'm telling you that the system was against the invasion of Iraq.
I don't believe that at all. In fact, there were
The
large
civil
numbers of
servants
people.
were against it. You've not been paying attention to the Chilcot inquiry in that case. The civil servants were against it. The ambassadors were against it. The military were against it.
Well, maybe you're giving
It was
way too
Blair
much
that
credence
drove it.
to another whitewash, which clearly is not going to reveal the real evidence that we need to be looking at if we want to understand why these decisions are made. The Chilcot inquiry, along with every other government-instigated independent investigation, is a sham. So while we may get some useful information out of it, I'm not giving the Chilcot inquiry the same kind of substance and value that you do. But of course, you're a career politician.
You have
George,
no
you're
idea
a career
what
politician,
substance
so
and value I'm giving it.
you have an
I'm
inherent
telling
stake. You have an inherent stake in backing up a system that you come from for 30 plus years. So I'm not getting personal here, but
you
obviously believe. I'm not. I could get personal, but I'm not doing it. I'm telling you that
you
I do
wouldn't
not.
want me
I
to
do
get
not
personal
believe,
about you, Ken.
Listen, if you
I
want to
promise
get personal, George,
really
there's no
wouldn't.
problem there.
You really wouldn't.
We can do that right
but
now.
That would be boring for the audience who have never heard of you, don't know who you are, and don't really care what you think of me. The point is, it is fatuous nonsense and it's defeatist. It's what they want you to say, that it doesn't matter. Politics doesn't matter. Who wins doesn't matter. That some all-powerful supermen somewhere make the decisions. Well, as somebody who has been practicing politics for a very long time, I happen to know that that's not true. This has been Kali Mahorra. I've been George Galloway on Al Mayadeen Television.